Hello there, guys, and welcome back to my channel. Well, we've just been left by Connor, but I'm sure he'll be back in just a second's time. Where we are joined today by Ollie, by Connor, to discuss Chelsea versus Gent in the Conference League, but also, arguably even more so today, looking at how good are Chelsea actually right now, because there's been a lot of praise, a lot of hype, a lot of, all of a sudden kind of positive discourse around us. Now, sure, there's still some negativity in the media because they don't really want to give it to us. Weirdly, for example, Paul Merson has gone from being all the time optimistic last year when we were terrible to now all of a sudden that we are actually decent and being quite pessimistic. So I don't know what's happening there. So we'll need to talk about that. Is Cole Palmer the greatest player ever to grace football? Obviously isn't. But is he the greatest player in the Premier League? Maybe he is. So a lot to talk about. And also, can we actually be title contenders? No, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure Ollie and even Connor probably don't think so. But could we be? Obviously, we'll look ahead at our next fixtures. Was it maybe just a purple patch due to some somewhat favourable fixtures? Obviously, we did lose to Man City. And then since then, not but played bad teams, but not played, the best teams, including we played Wolves, who obviously bottom, right? So, that will play its factor. Connor has joined us again, but I will go with you first, Ollie. Ollie, thank you very, very much for joining. I appreciate it. It's an interesting time at Chelsea, isn't it? Because we went from being depressed and sad for pretty much 2 years straight to all of a sudden having to deal with, that's what it's like to win a few games, and it's not the end of the season where nothing relevant is achievable anymore. So here we are. How do you feel about Chelsea at the moment? Because I think a lot of us, there was all this talk when it was in the summer or last year. It's like, I felt disconnected to Chelsea. I'm not sure if necessarily you said that or not, and then now obviously we're winning again. Everybody's a bit happier. Everybody's more into it. And now people are, trying to, basically take the piss out of those people and say, you felt disconnected. Where is your disconnection now? So where do you stand on it? Because, the result at the moment is certainly cheering me up. I can't lie.
Oh yeah, we're playing some good football. We're actually quite good at this football thing, aren't we? Yeah, it's been a weird one because I think there's been a lot of moments in the last 3 years or so where there's been a lot of false dawns. Like we've strung a couple decent enough performances together. We think, is this going to be the moment we turn the corner? Is this going to be the moment we turn the corner? And inevitably, we would crash down to earth. Have a terrible performance against some absolute dross who we should be beating, and then we'd go on a poor run. And that kind of just hasn't happened in a little while. We seem to be not just beating teams, but beating them comfortably. We're creating chances. We're resolute defensively. We're doing all the things we should do. The team's fighting for each other. They're connected together. They're working hard for each other and working hard for the manager and sticking to his principles as well. So, yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. It seems like there's a bit more hope returning back to the fan base. I think probably there is still a little bit of a ways to go. I think it's probably needs to be a little while before we say sort of we're back sort of thing, because to me, it feels like while this hasn't necessarily been a purple patch, I think it's been a really good run of form from us. I also think some of the underlying statistics maybe don't quite benefit us in the same way. And I wonder if they will eventually sort of even out a little bit. So it's about a little bit like how we react to that as that regresses to the mean and we continue to try and find solutions for stuff. But honestly, I think we've been really good. I think we've played really well. I've been really impressed with Maresca. I've been really impressed with the team's attitude at the start of the season, Servette aside. And yeah, it's good right now. I think on the disconnection question, I think I have been someone who said at times over the last 3 years that I've felt quite disconnected from the club. I'm sure if you look back in my tweets, you'll find a handful of them. But that was mostly, I believe, during the Potter era. And I don't think it was necessarily wrong to feel that way then. I think it probably is wrong to feel that way now. And I think it was probably wrong to feel that way at least by halfway through last season as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I felt like that at times during this summer. Because it just felt like, okay, we got to an okay spot at the end of last season. Now, sure, whether people wanted Poch or didn't want Poch, I felt like we got to an okay spot. Like we finished sixth, quite close to top four. We started playing okay football. And then all of a sudden we came into the summer, started signing a ludicrous amount of players again, started selling players who were some of our important players last season. And I was like, Now, I'm not saying this can't work, but it's just so risky again. For now, it has worked. So, that's certainly a bit more positive way for looking at it, 100%. It's interesting how you said in terms of like, we thought on a couple of occasions, are we back now? And then the next game, it crashed down upon us. I feel like this is and maybe that's why I'm quite so positive and optimistic right now, because I felt the Brighton game was exactly the game where in the last 2 years it would have fallen apart.
Mm-hmm.
But this time it didn't. And now, sure, it may just fall apart tomorrow night or against Forest on the weekend. Who knows? But it felt like last season, after those couple of wins, whether it was against West Ham or it was against Bournemouth, where we didn't kind of deserve it, and obviously the midweek one against Barrow, I felt then the next one wouldn't have worked. But this time it did. And it could have been, it was 4-2. It was already pretty good and everything. But we could have won 7-2 easily. And imagine, Cole Palmer could have had 10 goal contributions in one game. Imagine that would have happened. Obviously, unlikely to happen in the first place. But yeah, we're certainly in a better spot right now. And to make our spot even better, we're also joined by Connor Holden today. People, you would know him from Twitter. You would know him from YouTube. His link is down in the description as always. Unfortunately, for some reason, StreamYard and his phone combined are not letting him use his camera. So that's why you can see his profile picture. But maybe you know his profile picture. You know who he is. So Connor, first of all, thank you for joining. I appreciate it very much. I'll ask you to, go into a bit of analysis and everything else in a little bit. But first, I want to start with a bit more of a broad and overall question, similar to what I posed to Ollie, really. Because I'm aware and I understand that you obviously have a bit of a maybe slightly different perspective sometimes on things as an analyst than maybe us as more normal fans, let me call us, are to you. So I'm intrigued about how you feel so far into the season and compared, like, how does that compare to what you would have expected during pre-season, the first, until October 2nd to look like? Because, even Maresca is obviously talking about, in his estimations, we're kind of ahead of where he maybe expected us to be at this point. Maybe not fully in results basis, because, for example, Palace we could have beat, but then Bournemouth we could have not beat. But in a grand scheme of things have moved quicker in terms of the direction that he wanted than I expected and seemingly than he expected. So I'm wondering, did it also surprise you a little bit?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me back on the channel. It's been a little while since I've been on, I think. But yeah, I think we are ahead, personally. I do see this, and I think it's positive that we're ahead, because not just for the fact that we're ahead of schedule, but I think it gets the fans on side better, and you've seen that quite quickly. A lot of fans sort of jumping on board, even though, in my opinion, we haven't actually seen the Maresca that I have expected to see yet, and I think that's still to come. I think we're going to see a lot more of his actual implementation of style a lot quicker. But I think what a lot of the fans are getting behind is his adaptability, and something that he's shown already in abundance, in my opinion, is that he can tweak the system to get the best out of certain players when it's needed. So Palace is one I always refer to, even though we drew the game. I actually think the tweaks made in that game were very strong tweaks. I think it really did work. I think we were just unlucky not to win that game. I think he coached a win, if in all honesty. As bad as annoying as that is for some people to hear the coach to win phrase.
That's
I
how
think
football goes sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And it just didn't go our way, and then we got lucky, and it sort of repaid itself in the Bournemouth game where we were quite poor and we did get a win. So happy days. But yeah, I'm expecting a lot more to come on the Maresca side. But like I say, I think it's really good that we've just got the results, no matter how they came at the minute, because I think it will just do a lot of good to get a lot of the fans that maybe weren't on board with the Maresca appointment now sort of on board, and then it will make it a lot easier. And I think it's actually going to allow us to sort of more smoothly implement the rest of his system as the season goes on. That's
gives the
not to
players
say
a bit of
not...
confidence as well, doesn't it? With the good performances
Exactly.
to start off, like it gives them a little bit of faith in the manager as well. Like it's bought Maresca a little bit of goodwill from the players and the fans.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there was a quote today from one of his from his presser saying about, obviously, he wants Nkunku and Mudryk to sort of push on and make the Conference League their sort of way of pushing their way into the Prem side. And that those little quotes I love, because I think it's really the motivation to perform in all competitions. I think it's just all going to culminate into making us a much stronger squad in every single phase, every single competition, rather than just the Premier League. So I think Maresca's done a great job so far, but I still expect there to be a lot more.
As do I, and I think as do we all. I think the big deal and the big question for me at the moment is, how good are we actually? And I know that's a silly and maybe like a simple question to pose, But it's genuinely a question I'm wondering about, because I mean, I can bring up the fixtures if we want to. You know what? Initially, I can even bring up the table, because obviously right now we sit in fourth, which, you know, is pretty good going for us.
I mean, it's the highest
we
we've
haven't
been in a while.
fourth in a long time. Exactly. I think this is the first time we are in the top four since this new ownership took over. We're 2 points off top now. I'm very aware it's only 6 games played, but still, you know, we've only lost 1. We've only drawn 1, 4, the same amount as Arsenal and Man City. And we did already play one of the big teams in Man City. So it's not like we only did, like, I don't know, Liverpool, who didn't really yet play one of the bigger teams yet. So we are looking good. But Connor, do you feel like us being in fourth right now is a true reflection of how good we are? I've always found it interesting, like the other kind of bigger analyst in the sphere. Obviously, you're an expert, as a lot of people would know him. He was on the channel a few times as well. Obviously, he said he thought before the season that we'd finish fourth. Now, as much as obviously Connor is also an analyst, and I don't want to say that you're by any means at all worse or better or whatever than Alex, but you're also a Chelsea fan, which Alex isn't. Yeah. So it's also a slightly different perspective, where it's like difficult for you yourself probably, but also for others to judge, okay, how much of this is pure analysis and how much of this is maybe a bit of, you know, just being a fan, which obviously you are as well, which is more than, exactly, just more than natural. But he also said he expects at a certain point the performances to drop a little bit for us to start to finding things a little bit more difficult. Now, first of all, do you agree with that we're going to see that at some point? But do you not also agree, and I think Alex would say the same thing, that so far things have looked easier than we probably all expected them to look, like in terms of how the games go, with literally the one exception kind of being Bournemouth. Now, sure, you can say Palace, but like you said, we kind of should have just won that game when we just didn't. But other than against Bournemouth, and obviously taking the Servette and City games out of it, we've played well and good to score multiple goals, to not concede too many goals, pretty much every game. But that can't continue forever, or can it?
Yeah, I agree with Alex. I've spoken to him about it as well. So like we're pretty much of the same sort of opinion that it is gonna hit a rough patch at some point, because as I've said, at the minute, I actually don't think the system is fully implemented. I think what we're actually seeing is a byproduct of Maresca's tactical sort of ability to change games fluidly within the game, rather than actually implementing a whole system within a few months, which is what a lot of people that are sort of just from the outside looking in will think he's done. He's sort of come in, he's got them playing this type of football, but I actually don't think we've seen that quite yet. I think instead, as I've said, like he's just adapted really well to each opponent individually. I mean, if you look at the West Ham and the Brighton game, we had less than 50% possession. We were the ones sitting off slightly, but that was by design. It was to lure them onto us and then hit them on the break. And it's little tweaks like that. That's not Maresca's ideal sort of system and philosophy, but he knew it would work against that opposition. And I think that's what's really going to help fans with the buy-in. So whether we hit a rough patch, I mean, the Bournemouth game is a great example of that. If that was a 0-0, people would have lost their heads. And I think this weekend against Forest, for example, it could be a very similar story where we hold a lot of the ball and we maybe struggle to break them down. Well, it could also be the other end where we score 2 or 3 first-half goals and we look absolutely amazing. And then that sort of destroys their low-block plan. But there's always going to be games this season where we look like we could end up with a 0-0 or even a 1-0 loss, due to sort of still trying to get used to those patterns of play when breaking down a low block. So we're only going to get to know that the more we play against them. And I think the first test of that really is going to be sort of this week against Gent and against Forest.
No, exactly. I do agree. I do agree 100%. It is interesting because that whole topic that you mentioned in terms of that Maresca's kind of played differently to how, well, he maybe would in an ideal world like to play, but also how everybody expected him to play. And I quickly want to touch on that. And after you've explained your thoughts on that, I want to get Ollie involved in that as well. 2-part question in a way, Connor, because firstly, how much did it surprise you that Maresca has turned out to be this tactically adaptable so far? I guess maybe it's even a 3-part question, that because this one that I just asked kind of leads me on to, do you think that will change as he becomes more confident in the team, you know, playing out his main ideal plan A all the time against no matter who? And then, but lastly, in terms of, do you think we'll go, I guess it's kind of part of my last question, but I'm wondering, like, the way you said it's not really how his ideal setup. So do you because I'm like, so has he just changed his ideal setup of what his ideal way is? Is his ideal way of playing adapting to the opponent and finding the best solution, adapting to what the opponent, what kind of threat and whatever situation they pose? Or do you think eventually we will go back to a situation like Leicester had, where we're going to do almost the same thing nearly every week? Because that's the thing that's honestly surprised me most about Maresca. I didn't see this coming, because we talked about it, where maybe we'll show some pictures later as well. Against Palace, we all of a sudden had Caicedo playing centre-back. Then in some other games, we're inverting fullbacks. Then in some other games, we played a box midfield, or not even a box midfield, a diamond midfield. Usually we play a box midfield with the inverted fullback, obviously. But we're changing it so much, and I love it. And especially because none of them have seemed to be stupid changes so far. Like, once he makes a change that, in the end backfires, then obviously maybe we'll have a different opinion on how good we think this is. But for now, and I know this was many questions kind of posed into one, but maybe you could elaborate it in kind of one long answer, if that makes sense. Because first of all, just what I'm most intrigued about, what do you think? Did it surprise you as much as it surprised me that he is so flexible?
No, and I don't like, this is where it's going to come across like I'm trying to say, oh, I knew this. But when I sort of analysed Maresca before he joined, my notion was that the stubborn claims of him were completely unfair. He plays in a 3-2-5, yes, and he did that a lot at Leicester because it was sort of the best fit for his personnel. But within that system, he did have tweaks. He'd bring his wingers narrower at times. He'd play the striker deeper so that the wingers could basically play as like his two strikers. Like, there was lots of different ways of doing things when he was at Leicester. It was just that it all looked the same from the outside looking in if you'd only watched one or two of their games. But if you watched a long sort of highlight, or not highlight, but you watched all of them alongside each other, you could see that each game had different tweaks involved, similar to what we've seen at Chelsea. Maybe not to the same degree, where we've seen so many in such a short space of time. But you could see it was a pattern of his. It wasn't like a massive shock to me. In terms of will it sort of return to like a more of the norm? I think slightly. I think it will depend on opposition still. So I think what we'll probably see the longer he's here and the longer when things start to slowly sort of block by block go into place, I think against those teams that we are just far better than, you will see a more structured, we're going to play our game and we're going to beat you by playing our game because we're confident in our game. Against a City, an Arsenal away, a tough game, so maybe a different type of game, even a West Ham at the London Stadium, where they're going to try and hit you on the break. Those sort of games, I think possibly we'll still see that. Well, I do still think we'll see that adaptability from Maresca, because I think that is quite ingrained in him, that he sees football like a chess match. He wants to always be watching to make that final tweak, and if he can help the players get that last little bit of detail to help in a result, then he will. So I do think that we're going to see more of a norm as the season goes on, and you'll see longer game patterns where we play the same way. But I also do think that sort of adaptability isn't going to disappear.
Interesting, very interesting, especially that. And I'm not taking this as all, you trying to be a smart ass and saying you knew. I try to find it more interesting than everybody that watched them last season, including Athletic journalists, because I read a very long article about Maresca by the Athletic before he joined, or maybe even when we were initially linked with him, not even once it became like official. That they were all trying to tell me how he was very much rigid within the system and everything else, and I'm like, well, certainly isn't looking like that now. I mean, Ollie, I assume you read a lot of those things as well. I assume you heard a lot of those things as well. So did that also take you by positive surprise that Maresca is so tactically flexible? And also, well, not just tactically flexible. A lot of people are tactically flexible and making it work every week, it seems, at the moment.
Yeah. Do you know what? I was one of the people who sort of thought that he might be a bit more stubborn. You tend to see that amongst more managers who do prefer that kind of positional style of play, I find. But I've been very impressed by his flexibility and his adaptability as well. And not only that, I hate to compare apples and oranges, and comparing him to someone like Pochettino, because he had his own merits and whatnot, and I don't want to get into the whole debate here, but you saw last season quite a lot. Pochettino occasionally made experiments with how he laid out the team, whether it was Chilwell at left wing, whether it was someone at the right back position, whether it was something changing up, whatever.
Yeah. Obviously, the injuries played into that as well.
And injuries played a big part of that too. But What we also didn't see was, which is something I've been really, really encouraged by with Maresca, is when something doesn't work, he just bins it. Like that to me is the testament of a truly adaptable manager. Throw something at the wall. If it sticks, great. It might be a tool to our belt. When it doesn't work, maybe we need to rethink this. Don't use that again, because it becomes a liability that other teams can exploit. I like the fact that he's making us defensively resolute, like as a prerequisite, but also trying to make sure we score as many goals as possible. I think Connor's right, though. I don't think we've seen the best of it yet. And being so early in, I don't think that would be a wise thing to assume anyway. It might be that, like Connor says, he's more like, trying to get everyone up to speed with the system, and so we're looking at things on a tactical level, game to game, in order to see how we're going to break people down. But I also partially see it in the sense of, like, we're actually doing a little bit better than we think. In the way that the players are listening to instructions and the results we're getting, and I think eventually that's going to regress back to the mean. I think I mentioned it before. Some of our underlying statistics, like our XG, for example, I think we're slightly overperforming. We're slightly overperforming in a lot of other little metrics like that, and eventually those things will regress back to the average. And it's just a case of, like, when they do so, have we built up enough groundwork? Has Maresca laid the groundwork for us to be able to bridge those problems when we get there? Because I think you're right. I think he is eventually going to hit a wall. Eventually, every manager kind of does this in the Premier League. This is kind of how a lot of new managers come into the Premier League. We're just not very used to it at Chelsea, because we don't get a new manager bounce very often.
Or too often that we don't notice.
Yeah, or too often that we don't notice. So it's nice that he's come in and he's really made a difference like that. I think there's still going to be some more headaches to come. I think when we get into the season proper, we have some injuries, when the schedule's really tight. Things like that, it might derail us a little bit. But I'm interested to see how Maresca adapts to that as well, because he's proven himself very adaptable so far.
It's very, very true. First of all, like JC said, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. And also, everybody in the chat, if you have questions, whether that's to me and Ollie, or maybe more specifically to Connor, whether it's about tactics or whatever else kind of questions you have that maybe you want answers or want to know what an analyst thinks about it. Like Demonand said earlier, we need a 10 to 15 game sample size to really know how good we are. I want to see how we play against Arsenal, Newcastle, and Liverpool. Now, first of all, I agree. Second of all, well, we haven't played that many yet, so we have to talk about what we can talk about so far. But also, we've played 6 Prem games, we've played 2 Conference League games, and we played a Cup game. So in total, we are at 9 games. So we're not far off your 10 to 15 game sample size here. Now, sure, in terms of maybe relevant opponents, maybe you were more talking about the Prem, that is more than fair. But I have a question for you on kind of something that kind of Ollie touched on, Connor, because this whole idea that, okay, a new manager comes in, and then at some point the opponents start to figure you out, and then you start to struggle more. And there's many examples of that being true, whether that's Antonio Conte, whether that's Thomas Tuchel, whether that's God knows how many managers this has happened to. But then my counterpoint to this would be Enzo Maresca's post-match interview after the West Ham game, when he was sat there talking about how West Ham under Lopetegui play, even though Lopetegui has only been here at exactly as long at West Ham as Maresca has been at Chelsea. And I'm like, so if Maresca can figure it out about Lopetegui, even though Lopetegui has only been here the same amount of time, why can't they figure it out about us? And then,
because he's more adaptable. That's what I think. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, but then doesn't that mean that ball won't come, or it will come a lot later than it comes for other managers?
That's kind of where I was getting to, is that, like, I think eventually we are going to face those kind of issues, but I think actually the hallmark of a strong manager is their adaptability. You stay ahead of the game. You make it harder for people to be able to figure you out over time. It's what Pep's done for years. So it makes sense to see Maresca do it as well.
I guess so. I mean, Connor, how do you see that? Like I say, especially, a lot of people always saying, oh, new managers, it's easier to surprise teams. But then Maresca didn't have a problem with not getting surprised by a different new manager.
Yeah, and I think you pretty much hit it on the head in terms of, like, what separates the best from sort of the middle ground is that managers will have multiple ideas and ways that they want to go into a game, and they'll almost have sort of their primary way of playing, but then they'll know, right, if a team figures that out, then what they've changed to figure that out, we have a plan B which will actually counteract that plan. So, like, it's almost changing between your systems as teams figure you out, if that makes any sense. So whereas somebody like Dewsbury, who's I think is brilliant, but he's very sort of within one structure, whereas when he did get figured out, he sort of wanted to play through it rather than making some tweaks, which I do actually think he does make some tweaks, but and again, I think he's painted a little bit unfairly with the stubborn brush, but he's more stubborn than Maresca, definitely. So I think it's all down to can Maresca figure out and allow and teach Chelsea 2, 3, 4 systems once he's already got the first one and laid down. And I think the answer is yes, because I think we've already seen the fact that he can do that. And tweaks don't always have to mean change of formation, doesn't always have to mean change of personnel, but it can just be little minor details that you're telling one player to drop and to like make their runs with a little bit more width, or the timings of when to drop in, when to not, and when to expand the pitch, when to make it tight. So there's a lot of sort of intricacies that aren't always spotted by sort of your fans. So yeah, I think in the long term, I think we're going to see how Maresca's got sort of quite a few ways for Chelsea to play, and I think especially with the bigger tool set that he now has.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, because my next follow-up question, on the one hand, I want to talk about what Maresca did to actually make us better than we were last season, what has changed to make that happen. But even more kind of, because we're just talking about his adaptability, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much for this and you actually have an answer for that. We'll see. Maresca post-match against Brighton spoke about how Brighton surprised us in the first half with what, I'm not sure if it was about how they were pressing or how they were playing and moving on the ball. First of all, can you maybe explain it to us, but of course, the viewers, what exactly Brighton did that surprised us, and then what we changed to kind of stop that for the second half? Is that a clear thing that happened for you?
I think from what I sort of drew from the game is that them starting Vifer and Baleba in the middle together made them sort of, they had Vifer playing deeper and Baleba being able to sort of cover the ground around him in deep build-up. So when we was trying to go man for man against them, the gap between Enzo and Caicedo was getting quite sort of stretched, and Baleba just has far more physical ability than even Caicedo, and Caicedo's quite physically good, but Baleba's just a monster. He can eat up ground like anything. So the wider that gap was, the better they were able to sort of manipulate that with their two midfielders. So I think in the second half, we just sort of had Enzo drop a little bit deeper in the press, rather than, because there was an image like 2 minutes into the game that I took, and it had Enzo was pretty much behind. It was like a diamond press with Caicedo really far back and Enzo really high up. And I think in the second half, the biggest change was really just dropping them two and sort of making it more of a 4-4-2 than a 4-1-3-2 press, if that makes any sense.
Okay, very interesting. Now that is interesting, because those are the kind of tactical flexibilities that I am most intrigued about. When it's about halftime, you adapt to what the opponent is doing in game. What I loved in that game, I think, I can't remember if he said this before or after, but he was talking about how he not only did he watch Brighton's game under Hutzler, obviously their new manager, at Brighton this season, he also watched Hutzler's game at St. Pauli in the second Bundesliga last season. He got promoted, but then left before he played the Bundesliga with them, which I think. Now, on the one hand, I'm like, this screams burnout in the next 2 years. On the other hand, this is very impressive preparation. Do you think that is one of the factors that is changing at the moment? Obviously, we'll talk about tactics and how he's maybe using players better, differently, whatever word you want to use for it. But it's just being better prepared as the manager, and then also, explaining that preparation, handing that preparation to your players, and therefore just being better prepared to face each game. Do you think that plays a bigger part than maybe people give it credit for?
Yeah, and I think Maresca is brilliant at that, because I think we've already heard from people like Madueke just saying that, like, even just the small details that he will give to Madueke on a singular level, just person to person, has helped him improve his game a lot more this season, carrying over from last, in terms of getting in the box to score goals and just sort of little ways of how to make runs in behind. So if he's doing that with each and every player on the pitch, an exact role of what to do, it's helping them to like enhance their performance, and, like you say, delivering sort of a more prepared sort of team talk for each and every game. Because a lot of the time last season, it felt like under Pochettino, like you say, we went in quite underprepared in most games, and it felt like even though the changes that needed to be made felt really apparent, they often went unaddressed. Whereas right now, it feels like every single thing that is spotted, it's either mentioned in a press conference or it's
Yeah.
addressed instantly. And I love, that's one of the things I absolutely love about Maresca.
Yeah, it just seems you have a bit of a better, like with Poch, you just didn't know whether he just didn't want to tell us or if he just had no clue. And
It's
maybe
probably a
that
bit
sounds
both.
harsh. Yeah, maybe it is a bit of both. Connor, I've got it up now. You were talking about it earlier, kind of at Leicester, but also with us. For the most part, that 3-2-5 or 3-2-4-1, whichever way you want to call it, that we kind of base sets up in. Sometimes it's the right back inverting, sometimes the left back inverting, whatever the position or the personnel situation allows best, I guess. An interesting one, and because you didn't necessarily mention it, so now I'm intrigued whether you see it as more similar than I do, because we've also spent a fair few games where we played rather than a 3-2-5 or 3-2-4-1. I felt we played more of a 3-3-4 or a 3-3-4-0, if you want to say that there was no out and out striker. Is this how I dragged it around now? Is this very different to you than this one, or is it actually more similar than maybe I and others think for you in your analytical mind?
It's similar. I view them as different. They're different shapes in different build-up patterns, but they are like interchangeable within a game. So you may literally see a 3-3-4 and a 3-2-5 within the exact same possession. But I think it's very common that we're seeing that shape that you've got up on screen there with the 3-3-4, with the exact lineup that we're playing now, because it allows Enzo to drop in a little bit deeper. It allows Palmer to go really close with Jackson and sort of use Jackson's link up play and Jackson's ability to stretch play. It just frees Palmer up a lot more and gives him a platform to perform. So I think it's just, again, having that 3-3-4, it's just perfect for pretty much every single player on the pitch is playing in a role that suits them.
Exactly. And that's what I love most, because one of the issues has been Enzo Fernandez's, in quotation marks, usefulness. Now, I think we've come to a point where also in games when he does have a decent game or a good game, people say he's been awful, because that's now the thing that everybody just says. And I just don't really fully understand why. It takes me very much back to when I felt very similarly about people always saying Jorginho had a bad game, even when he didn't have a bad game, in my opinion. And I think in those games where Enzo played more clearly this role, I felt that he found things a bit easier than when he was having to be here too much. Because first of all, I felt he struggled with getting here in time, and that's what often fans were annoyed about, him losing tackles or losing duels in that period where he was making his way from being here and also often being sometimes even the highest presser to then dropping in kind of next to Caicedo while the right back then drops into right back as we go off the ball again. And then you kind of have the midfield too like this, right? And in this period where he drops here is where I felt that's where a lot of his criticism comes from, because he just didn't have quite the legs, but also you're kind of always behind the guy you're potentially trying to have a duel with. So making it very difficult to, well, get into the duel. And even if you do get into the duel, making it very difficult to win the duel. So Enzo Fernandez is an interesting one, and that's why I quickly want to touch on him. Connor, where do you stand on Enzo Fernandez's performance so far this season? And I'll get Ollie's thoughts on that as well, if maybe he does have a different view on it as not being an analyst. Because do you think Enzo has been kind of not good enough at any point? Or not at any point is maybe the wrong question. But would you say Enzo hasn't been good enough and we haven't still found a way to really make Enzo work the best? Because my intrigue is, seriously, intrigue still is, what happens with Romeo Lavia now? Because Romeo Lavia is not in the Conference League squad, which I still find a little bit of a, like, I understand the whole resting him and stuff, but if he's not going to start in the Prem, wouldn't it have made way more sense to just not play him in the Prem that much, but instead play him every Conference League game and just rest Caicedo in those? Would have made more sense to me anyway. But now that Lavia can't play Conference League, do we get to a point where Enzo doesn't play Premier League anymore? Like, doesn't play, but doesn't start those games. So that's why I'm intrigued, like what you thought of Enzo and just how you think the Enzo situation could develop with now Lavia being back, but not being able to play in a Conference League, so therefore needing his minutes in the Prem.
Yeah. I've been a massive Enzo person since he joined. I see the value in Enzo personally. I think and to the sort of question of, do I think he's sort of not being used well enough or he's not been good enough? My answer is no. I think he has been good enough. I think he's been fine. I think, if anything, the games where we've looked worst was against Bournemouth when we didn't have him in the team, because I just think that it lacked sort of tempo control. And I think that when Enzo's in there, it just offers a little bit more assurance on the ball in those deeper areas, and just almost a know-how of when to reset. It feels like he is the one that understands best when to go forward, when to go sideways, when to go backwards, at least for me. The Lavia opinion is, I massively agree. For me, it would have been Lavia starting in the Conference League every game to sort of build him up, because I think Lavia's amazing. But I think that Enzo and Caicedo have got, like, this midfield is working well in the Prem. So I think it's almost one of those situations now where Lavia's got to sort of almost get his bench minutes and work his way back to full fitness. I guess the good thing about this is we can really
he'll
manage
start,
him.
I'm sure, Newcastle in the Cup, for example. I assume Lavia will start that game. But
yeah, absolutely. But I think it's just a case of really managing him and making sure that when he does come back in, and if he really hits a nice run of form, which he had already, he was the best player on the pitch in the Man City game for me.
That's what I thought. That's why I'm like, if he's fit, he should be in the team.
Yeah, it's tough because I've been really like toying with this question a lot since the start of the season, really. Since the start of last season, it feels like, because I think all three of them are absolutely unbelievable. And it is just a case of, unless you're playing City away and Arsenal away, that for me is one of the only cases where you play all three. And apart from that, I do genuinely think that I wouldn't be upset with any of the combinations of the three. Enzo Caicedo, Enzo Lavia, Lavia Caicedo. I'd be happy with all three of those combinations, depending on the game. But so it's genuinely just down to form and who is important within the system. I do think something that's going a little bit not under the radar, because it gets sort of like highlighted a lot on streams and broadcasts, but I think a lot of what is communicated onto the pitch is communicated with Enzo. I know he's the captain, but if you always watch, Maresca's even before he was the captain, when it was Reece on the pitch, he's very communicated with Enzo Fernandez, and he's very sort of telling him and instructing him where to be, because he's so pivotal.
Do you think that could be a language reason as well in that? Obviously, Maresca isn't Spanish, or his mother tongue isn't Spanish, but first of all, Italian is quite close to Spanish, and second of all, Maresca played a lot of his footballing player career in Spain, so I assume he's very much fluent in Spanish. But then again, his English is perfectly good enough to explain it to everybody else as well, so maybe it's purely being the playmaker, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just the importance, like I say, but with his sort of connectivity in the team, especially in that 3-3-4, because he's so important at connecting the lines. And I think, again, at the weekend, Palmer gets the plaudits, but the plan from that game was centered around Enzo and Palmer. Those were the two against Brighton, where the plan really was sort of to make it tick and them to play that ball over the top. On another day, and 2 assists, and he played the ball to Sancho to win the penalty, but there was the offside Palmer goal, which obviously was offside, so that's fair enough. And there was another one where he put somebody through for.
I think he put Madueke through before Madueke assisted Sancho, or was that a Palmer pass? Actually,
no, there was. I remember from the thing, it could have been 2. It could have been 2 assists, and then the penalty, which, like, if you want, whatever you want to call that, pre-assist, but whatever you want to call it. But it's that sort of impact that I think goes under the radar of Enzo, because he's playing a lot of key passes and making a lot of things happen on the pitch. But if it doesn't come with a goal or assist, because of his price tag, because he's already quite under the microscope, he doesn't quite get the praise deserved for it, which, whether that's right or wrong, that's up to everybody else to decide. But
I will get back to the Lavia situation in a minute, but I do quickly want to stick on Enzo and actually get Ollie on this. Ollie's thoughts on this. Where do you stand on Enzo Fernandez? I know, Ollie, you haven't always been as sold as, for example, Connor has seemingly been from the get-go on Enzo Fernandez, or maybe not necessarily on his ability, more on how he is able to put his ability on the pitch for us. So do you agree with Connor that he's done good enough? Do you think he's been subpar so far? Where do you stand on it? And I'm not trying for you to have an argument with Connor here about who's right or wrong. I'm just intrigued.
If I do, I'll probably lose. So
I mean, probably. But you are on camera, so you can do crazy signs.
Yeah, I can point and stuff. So I am someone who hasn't always been Enzo Fernandez's biggest fan, because I think that spotlight that Connor was talking about, when a player doesn't necessarily have a good game, and the price tag really amplifies that. I actually don't have any doubts whatsoever in his ability. I think it'd be silly to assume so, because he's very clearly highly, highly talented. We saw it for Benfica. It was Benfica, wasn't it? We saw it for Benfica, and we saw it for Argentina. And then at Chelsea, it just hasn't quite clicked for him. Not yet. For me, a really important constituent part of being a midfielder is being versatile and useful in all phases of play. So on the defensive side of things, you're blocking passing lanes. You're trying to be available for a pass for a clearance. You are trying to put in your tackles in and win your ground duels and even win headers. Going forward, you've got to be trying to make good passes, and like we know Enzo can do, for assists. You want to be playing long balls. You want to be spreading the play, setting the tempo, and these are all things Enzo can do really well. What I struggle with is with Enzo, I think his performances as of late have been much better. I think he has been improving, and the team has improved with him. Yeah. I just still think he can show us more. And that's kind of where I'm at with Enzo. Is there was a point where I thought he didn't have any utility really being on the pitch whatsoever, because for all of his bags and talent, he couldn't really put it together on the pitch in all phases of play and actually lead us to victory. Now we're starting to see a change in that narrative. Mm-hmm. And so now I feel a little bit more comfortable with having Enzo in the team, and he doesn't need to be scoring and assisting every game. That's not it's an important part of being a midfielder, but it doesn't have to be every game. It's important to show that threat as a midfielder in every game rather than actually succeed in doing it necessarily every game. And so, yeah, I'm sort of at this opinion now where I'm happy enough to have him in the team. But I still think more than anything, he can show us more. I think his game can probably go up another 2 levels at least.
That is interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Connor, do you, as much as you think he's been good and done all right or decent, whatever word you exactly want to use, do you still agree with that from Ollie, that there is still a lot more from Enzo Fernandez that we could see? And then on top of that, do you think if we played him slightly differently, could we see even more? Or do you think the way we're playing him right now will eventually see the best of Enzo Fernandez?
Yeah, I think there's definitely levels to his game to go more. Like that, even saying that I think he's been good, I agree. I think he's got 2-3 more gears to go easily, because I do think I genuinely rate him that highly that I think he has world-class potential. I think he's elite. Purely, even just purely on his passing ability, I think it's one of the things that in a midfielder, especially of this generation, and I think he's quite rare in that in his profile in having that expansive passing range. So yeah, I do think he can take those next levels. I think if we dropped him deeper on the pitch, and I said this sort of at the start of the season when we got Maresca, I do think he's better utilised the deeper he is, which is why I quite like the 3-3-4, because it allows him to do that with protection. But I also do think, and I think Ollie touched on this as well with sort of all phase midfielders, I do think as much as I love the squad, how it has been built, I think one of the sort of shortcomings of the squad build is that the sort of pairings and the matchings of everything. Enzo's ideal partner would be sort of an Onana from Everton, sort of a real ground eater who can really protect him and have them next to each other deep in a pivot. Whereas what we've sort of got is a bit of everything. And I still think the profiles eventually are going to come together really nicely because they're such elite talents. But it just means that you have to balance it elsewhere, because you've got 2 midfielders that offer different things and don't completely complement each other. So it's really then important who's your left centre back, who's your right centre back, because they're actually even more important now because they're doing some of the balancing act for Enzo, for Caicedo. So I think the squad building could have maybe been done slightly differently to really optimise the talent of, if you're just solely speaking of Enzo Fernandez. But I completely think he's going to go up another few levels, and I think the role he's playing right now, where he is allowed to drop deep, is almost perfect for him. Like I say, unless the instances were different, say with squad building a year ago, then I think you could have maybe got even a little bit more. But I do think how things are right now is pretty much perfect for the squad that we've got right now.
100%. I quickly want to bring up a couple of comments here in the chat by Adam. And I'm going to show all of his comments because I don't want him to come across rudely, which he isn't at all. First, he says, Enzo can read the game at the highest level, so as long as he understands what to anticipate, he can compensate for his lack of speed and size. But to be fair, he doesn't look to be as mobile like he was at Benfica since the hernia. I still think we need to see a bit more of that if he doesn't seem perfectly fine now. He continues and says, Enzo's been a liability defensively lately. Having him deeper is a risk once we lose possession. But then he elaborates more that these are young players at the same time. We're not dealing with the final product complete profiles. I want to touch on, because that's the one that stuck into my eye first. I would love for you to reply to this, Connor, because I read it, I see it, I'm like, I disagree, but I can't truly give an explanation of how and why I disagree. And I hope you can, first of all, for the future, so I can just use it. And second of all, because, yeah, well, I just like it because I don't see it this way, but so many people do that I'm like, sure, a lot of people can be wrong, but I'm like, that's why I would love to hear how you would respond to such a statement.
Yeah, and again, I'm with you. I disagree. I think there is defensive liabilities, yes, but I don't think it's the idea of having him deeper because I think that Enzo's best ability.
I think him being deeper makes him less of a defensive liability because then he doesn't need to cover the ground first to get into the right position.
Exactly that. And I actually think I've always described him like this. I actually think his dueling from sort of laterally, hang on, I've got it the wrong way around. Sideways dueling, essentially.
Yeah, no, laterally.
He's actually very good. I think that's
so maybe I'll explain it on what you're trying to say here as you're explaining it. So what Connor is saying is, if Enzo is already in this position, Enzo reading the game, okay, where's the ball coming? Wait, I can actually add the ball to this.
Yeah,
like this. So say the ball's like coming from somewhere here. Enzo can adapt, and because he can read the game well, like Adam said in a few comments before, Enzo can adapt to position himself correctly to stop danger if the ball is in front of him. But if Enzo starts here, we get the ball turned over somewhere here, and then Enzo is making his way slowly here while the ball is playing all sorts of ways, and then Enzo isn't here yet, and then trying to tackle someone from behind in this area, then that I agree he's not good at. But if he's just at the base already and can just adapt his position to where the danger is coming from, I think that he's actually good at. And I actually think at dueling itself, I don't even think he's bad. I think his duel rates overall, there was periods last season where he had better duel stats than Caicedo did. I'm not saying he's better in duels than Caicedo is, but I'm saying he's not as bad as for some reason people are making him out.
He's very strong in the duel, actually. Like I say, when he's in position and he's like laterally dueling, he's strong. He's got a very sort of good standing tackle. His lunge in terms of coming out with the ball is actually very good.
I wonder if it's his like when he gets double teamed, because when he gets double teamed, he gets quite badly. Like the ball often gets stripped from him quite badly when he's double teamed. But that shouldn't be a negative.
But doesn't that apply to most players? That's
what I was going to get at. Like that applies to most players. I think it just looks worse because he's undersized. That's probably why.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry, Connor. Did you want to elaborate on that more?
I'd just say that when you lose it, like you say, I think it's very common with if you get double teamed on the ball. But I think actually quite a lot of the time he does sort of find a way to either buy the foul and sort of like go down. He does this thing with his back often, which I've noticed he always sort of puts his back into the air to make sure that the impact takes him to the floor rather than sort of just nudging him off. And the other thing is he actually manipulates the ball quite well. So whether it always goes to a player, different story, but he sometimes even gets out of those double teams. I think there's quite a lot of clips from do you remember the Liverpool game last season where there was those little games where he's like sort of dragging it between two players and sort of little flicks when he's getting double and even triple teamed at times, and he's just sort of evading the pressure. So I think at the very best he's actually even good at that, and then that gives you an overload once you get past that double team because there's now a man missing from their press. So yes, it can come with its negatives, but like you already said, I think that's the case for anyone getting double teamed on the pitch. It has a positive and it has a negative. It just depends what way it goes.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. Adam continues his thought a little bit, or also his reaction to what we have now said. He says, the thing is with being deeper, is the deeper you are, the more dangerous part of the pitch you're responsible for. I get your point, though. I might just need to see it more, to be fair. And then he adds a question to it, which maybe you can reply to, Connor, because although I fear you also don't have an answer to this, because I think you're also asking yourself that to a small extent. But I think the explanation is purely squad building. But we'll see. But my question is for you guys, why haven't we seen it? Under Poch and now Maresca. Outside of Potter, he's usually higher up. And I don't know why, honestly. And honestly, I ask myself that question as well. Because I see him play for Argentina. And obviously, international football is very different. International football at the South American scale with how the pitches are there and everything. And in some of the games that they're playing, the latitude as well. Just changes the situation dramatically. But still, when you see him play deeper, when you watch that World Cup back, and you're like, why aren't we getting that out of him? Like, sure, he's a creative passer, and you want him closer in the final third so he can play a last pass like the one to Sancho that won us the penalty, sure. But I still think there's more players that can do what Enzo does in the final third that we have, whether that's Palmer, whether that's Sancho, whether that's potentially Nkunku, even though obviously Nkunku more wants to be on the end of it rather than the one creating it. But there's very few in the world, let alone in our squad, that can do what Enzo does to control a game from deep. So I have the same question Adam does. Why aren't we seeing this? Like, is it purely just because we also have Caicedo and Enzo is more suited to being higher up than Caicedo is, and therefore, well, one of them has to be deeper, so it has to be Caicedo?
Yeah, that's how I see it, because like you said, I think under Potter, I think we did see him as the 6, and I thought he looked good there, but we all knew that it could sort of it could unlock him a little bit more to have the right person next to him. And again, I like Caicedo and Enzo.
Sorry to interrupt you, but why can't that be Caicedo? Like, why can't Caicedo just be what Kante was on Asari and Enzo be what Jorginho was on Asari?
I'll weigh in
like...
here. I think it's because what's required of both Enzo and Caicedo requires them to be in such different parts of the pitch that at the end of the day, they don't end up complementing each other very much because they're so far away from each other. We saw that under Pochettino. We've seen it under Maresca as well.
I agree, but now
one of them is always really far ahead.
Change the problem?
What do you mean?
Now that we invert to fullback, you put someone next to the deep player, which gives Enzo more support than if you let Caicedo roam and have no one next to him.
Yeah, except that player themselves is also rotating. They're not there all the time.
Yeah, but when he leaves, Caicedo should be back in an ideal world.
And there's your thing. That's where the gaps exist.
Yeah, I hear that. But yeah, it's only an interesting and a fascinating question. And what I wanted to touch on just quickly more, back to the whole Lavia situation, because now if we had it like this, and Enzo would play deeper, and Caicedo would play higher. Now I think Caicedo could actually do that, but I think because for so long already now we haven't done it this way around, that tells me if you're bringing Lavia in, Lavia needs to play instead of Caicedo, because otherwise you're asking Caicedo to do a different role to what he does every other game. And I think that's a bit more difficult for a player to achieve, to do a different role than he does usually. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible because Caicedo is very good, but I'm saying it's more difficult to achieve. So that tells me if we're replacing one of them in the Premier League team, we're more likely to replace Caicedo with Lavia. Would you agree with that, Connor, or do you disagree with that sentiment?
No, I do. I agree purely because.
But then,
yeah,
and then Lavia
just as I think Enzo. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't think that's going to happen. I do think Caicedo is going to remain in the Premier League team. I think Lavia, as highly as I rate him, and again, as great as a start to the season he had, I think we're more likely to just see a very slow sort of progression back into the team for Lavia. Start to play cup games.
Waste of him now, though.
It is, and it's once we sign Caicedo, as much as I love Lavia, and I was more advocating for Lavia sort of before I was advocating for Caicedo really last summer, because I rate him really highly. But I do think that it was slightly overkill to go for both, and I still retain that same opinion, even though I really am happy. I'm happy they're both here because I think they're brilliant players. But if you was to go back, if you asked me at that time, it's in the same way now that I think having sort of Felix is overkill, but I still like him.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It makes sense. So one follow-up question on that before I ask you more about what Maresca Enzo is doing so differently to Poch that makes us better. If we, for whatever reason, whether Enzo is suspended, injured, tired, whatever else he might be, if we replaced Caicedo, if we replaced Enzo with Lavia, and then Caicedo and Lavia would be in the team, how do you think we would line that up? Would we then stop inverting a fullback and play them just at the base and let a fullback, and then maybe you start Palmer as the right winger, let him drift inside, let Gusto become that person, and just keep these two the midfield base and have the rotation elsewhere rather than here in the central area of the pitch? Or do you then expect the fullback to continue inverting and then Caicedo push up instead of it usually being Enzo?
I think.
Go on.
Okay, I'll quickly just go because it's a bit different. I think what we'd maybe see more is Lavia at the base. So put it how you'd have it if it was Caicedo and Gusto sort of in a 3-3-4.
Okay, yeah.
I think what we'd actually see is then sort of Gusto almost drifting into the 10. Sort of like Porro. And then when Jackson goes forward, Palmer goes over. So it'd still look like a 3-2-5, but it'd actually be Caicedo and Lavia deeper and Gusto would sort of interchange with Madueke on the right, if that makes any sense.
I was actually going to say the same thing because I think that provides more balance to the midfield. As much as I think Gusto actually can invert, I think I've
It
seen a
makes
lot
the
of people
Palmer
say
position a bit weird,
not.
though, don't you think? Sorry, to
Palmer's,
interrupt.
Palmer would just be free.
Yeah, he's just going to do what he's going to do, isn't he? Like, wherever you
I
put him,
guess.
he's going to do his thing. I think actually what that's more about is getting the best out of Gusto, because while he can invert, he's better as a traditional fullback in those sort of overlapping situations.
You disagree with that, Connor, don't you?
I do think that you get a lot of his best attributes as an overlapping fullback. Again, though, it depends on the team that we're playing. So last season, I would have agreed with you, but in the way that we're playing him now, I think the reason I love him so much in inverted areas because his sort of athleticism and ability to win the ball back in central areas and then play forwards. And I think this has been shown. There was a graph on Twitter the other day that was going around, and he was
the one where he's
yeah,
up here, like
lost in the corner, because he wins the ball back so much in that central area and then progresses play quickly. But he also has the ability to carry through central areas. So like he's adding multiple layers of progression. It's not just through passing. He can carry that ball through the middle of the pitch on his own because he, like you've said, and we saw it on the wing last year. We've seen him do that. So
I agree.
That's why I love him in there.
I think he actually at the club, he's one of the best. He's got one of the best commands of the ball at the club.
Yeah,
like in terms of his touch. But the reason I slightly just disagree with you, because I do agree he definitely can play in that midfield role. I find him better out wide because I prefer his crossing. That's more or less it. Just provides a bit more width and aerial threat.
Yeah. If we had say an Osimhen, I think I'd agree. If we had like a real aerial threat, then I may change that.
True.
Yeah, that is fair. I'm just trying to look for this tweet that you're talking about. I had it as a screenshot, but the screenshot is a bit difficult to show. So now I'm scrolling to try and find that so I can actually show it on screen. But it turns out this page posts way more than I expected, so now I'm still scrolling. But just if I can chime in on that quickly, my point on that is actually I think if there's one thing that I think is slightly overrated about Gusto, it is crossing. And I know people think that's stupid of me to say that. But I think in particular last season where so much of our attacking happened down the right and so much of our attacking ended with a cross because Reece was never fit, from Gusto. I'm still scrolling, by the way. Where the flip is this? My God, I might miss it already while I'm trying to talk at the same time as scrolling. But there were so many occasions, and I felt this happened on those few occasions that Gusto got himself into that position this season as well. And maybe this season it's a bit unfair because he doesn't get there that often. But I actually think that final ball from Gusto is often not as good as I'd like it, especially when we're countering and he's trying to play like a cross along the ground to like the other side of the box. I think he's messed those up much more often than for some reason people think. So I'd much rather Madueke or Sancho be in those areas than I would Gusto being in that area. But I think Gusto's touch and running with the ball, I think Gusto midfield can replace Kovacic for us. And I don't think pretty much any other player other than potentially Reece James can do that. I think Gusto inverting and being in midfield gives us a player that will run past the press, while every other player that we have will pass past the press. And I think Gusto is the only one that provides us with someone running past the press and kind of doing a bit what Kovacic used to do for us. I mean, maybe I'm making shit up crazy now and Connor completely disagrees. Do you see where I'm coming from with that?
I do agree. Another player that I do think has that, though, is Lavia. I just don't think we've seen enough of him yet for people to sort of realise it. But Lavia definitely has that in his locker, and he showed that quite a lot in Southampton.
But if you're saying that about Lavia, if I bring that one up again, doesn't it not make sense that he's at the base? If that's a Lavia strength, wouldn't it make more sense if he was the further forward one?
Lavia is a great box-to-box midfielder, but his best attribute is when someone passes him the ball to be able to turn and go. Like linking the defence to midfield to attack, that's his best thing. So I think having him sit is probably the best option.
Yeah, and I also think he's quite well choiced in when he makes those sort of bursts through the middle. So I think he does it better from deeper because he sort of sees the gap open up and then goes. I think if anything, it would just then require Caicedo to sort of have his head switched on if it was how you've got it on screen and just be like, right, Lavia's gone. I'm going to drop into this gap for a second and then sort of let it return to normality after, because it isn't something, whilst it's something he can do, it's not something he'll do 8 times a game, for example.
I hear that. But do you see my comparison in terms of Gusto providing that kind of Kovacic in midfield where you can not only pass it past the press, but sometimes run past it?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons why I like him in there, because I think, like I say, it adds multiple layers of progression rather than just progressive passes, you add those progressive carries through the middle of the pitch. So yeah, 100%.
Here's a question for you both. We were talking a lot about Enzo Fernandez, and maybe it'd be blasphemy to suggest it, but in terms of the way we're talking about the dynamics of how the team is supposed to work, does Enzo Fernandez fit in this team? Do you get the same results with someone like Maresca's system with a slight tweak and someone else in maybe a slightly different role, maybe a Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, maybe an Nkunku, maybe someone else?
You as well. I was gonna slate the living daylight out of George, but even bringing Dewsbury-Hall up.
I'm just saying, like as an example, obviously not going to play in the same positions, but like if you're going to tweak stuff and move stuff around, say if Lavia comes in, you have something like Lavia Caicedo, someone plays a bit further up. Like, does this team need Enzo? I guess is the question I'm asking.
Well, if let's give Connor a second to give the right answer, and I'll give my opinion. My thought is, I hear what you're saying, but how do I best word this? With the players that we have in the squad, you don't have someone, in my opinion, that you can put in the team instead of Enzo that lets someone else do a different role and then be better than Enzo. I just don't think that is there. Now, like Connor said earlier, with different squad, I slightly disagree with Connor. I'm like, if we just play the double base of Caicedo and Lavia, I think that would work perfectly fine. And you wouldn't really need Enzo then, because we have plenty of creativity high up the pitch. Now, like Connor said, if like against Bournemouth, you had that example where maybe we're not just quite as good at it. But I think if you played Lavia next to Caicedo could have a slightly different responsibility. And I think Caicedo, maybe not as good as Enzo at it, but I still think Caicedo could become better at be the guy to control the tempo if he has a Lavia next to him. While if Caicedo has Enzo next to him, Caicedo can't have that role. And if he has Veiga next to him, well, Veiga is just a good step worse from that kind of perspective. But I mean, Connor, what is your answer to that question from Ollie?
Yeah, and like straight away, the Caicedo Lavia like pivot, I do definitely think it works. Like I say, when I said about like the three different pairings, I'd be happy with any of them because I do think it works. But I just think that Enzo is really important. So the overall arching answer that I'd give is no. I do think Enzo should be in the starting 11, pretty much in every best 11 that we have personally, because I think he offers balance. I think Caicedo and Lavia are more similar than any of them are to Enzo in terms of offering that tempo setter. I think Caicedo's, like you said as well, Laurenz, he's very rare. Again, he's another rare profile, in my opinion. I think he's a bit of everything. He's a bit of a destroyer. He's a bit of a like playmaker. He's genuinely got every sort of aspect of his game. He's really rare in that sense. But yeah, I do think Enzo is very important to the side. Again, if squad building had have been different, then yes and no, you could have had Enzo with a better partner that suited to him, or you could have had no Enzo and maybe a better suited partner for Caicedo. But that's not the world we're in.
Like, you gave us an example for who would be a better ideal partner stylistically for Enzo. Who would be a better partner in that sense for Caicedo, in your opinion?
I think that's a tough one, really, because I do think, like I said, with Caicedo, he's really rare in the sense that he's a bit of everything. That I think it would sort of depend game to game, and I haven't really thought about it as much with him because Enzo was already at the club, whereas Caicedo wasn't. Yeah. So, like, I was always in my head, I was always sort of like monitoring who's going to be the perfect Enzo partner, whereas obviously Caicedo's the right.
You'd probably have to pick someone who was almost like not the opposite of Caicedo, but like the different side of the center of Caicedo. Because like you said, Caicedo can do everything, but he's a bit more defensively balanced.
Yeah.
You probably want someone who could do everything, a bit more offensively balanced. And then that would allow for the most balance in the team.
Kind of is, but we're just using him as a number 10 instead.
I don't know. For me, Enzo's not that all-round player, but that's just me.
It would probably be it would probably be sort of like a tall carrier who can defend but is a little bit more attacking. So I don't know.
You know who that sounds like?
I was just about to say, what, you can say Carney?
No, I was going to say Conor Gallagher.
I thought you were going to say Conor Gallagher. Yeah.
I would, if I was to go out on a limb and just like really like, I'd probably say Bellingham, but that's
really,
yeah. Do you know what? That's probably a good shout though in terms of like.
Why not? Come on, Ekbali, you know. We want the team of cold celebrations. Do you know what I mean? Cole Palmer, Bellingham, the same team. Just hope it's not going to be at Madrid in 3 years. That would be nice. But yeah, by the way, Connor did also in the end send me that thing. Sorry, Connor, I did actually find it myself, but then we stopped talking about Gusto. So I was like, now I can't bring it up. But this is this graph that we were talking about in terms of here. I'm not sure if you guys can read it, but
he's a total
upside...
freak, Gusto.
Yeah,
Look at that.
Why is he there? What is this?
World design.
Yeah. The upwards kind of what do you call this in English? Axle. That's it.
Yeah.
Accurate forward passes. That's the upwards one, and defensive duels per 90 is the sideways one. And this is Gusto. And just to make things even more nice for Chelsea, here's also Cucurella, by the way. So it's not like we only have one guy up.
I was going to say that actually, because in that same graph, like Gusto being out there on his own, actually kind of it takes away from Cucurella being one of the most well-balanced players in those two metrics.
100%. Yeah. Exactly. We just have a fantastic... And this doesn't even include Reece James yet. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, because he's never fit. But imagine if Reece James was fit as well, and you could probably add a third of our fullbacks. And
the only other thing I will say, though, is like this obviously isn't just like an indicator of quality like by itself, because you can see where Trent Alexander-Arnold is on this, and he's a phenomenal player. So, you know... Like,
but is he a phenomenal fullback?
Well, that's a very good question. Gareth Southgate might agree with you with that question.
Exactly, because it is funny that even his accurate forward passes are so low down.
No, because he's always pinging long balls around, isn't he?
Yeah, but
you'd think that would make him better at them over time, but maybe he's just taking.
Sometimes?
It might be that he's just taking really risky balls, like because he's the one who's trying to deliver the ball up the pitch in that team, really.
He is. I mean, Connor, is that your explanation for how Trent ends up down here?
Yeah, it's more or less, like I say, it's the position and sort of the role that he has within the team. It is quite surprising how sort of low it is for like how many progressions he makes. But I think, as Ollie said as well, he's often trying to find the key pass. So if it doesn't quite make it, then it is sort of doesn't. But
like he's lower on the passes than he is on defensive duels. When you look at the graph.
That's one of those ones where you sort of look at it and you think, right, let me go look at the other metrics to sort of like figure out what this is, because that is an outlier.
Also, here is the other Liverpool fullback. What the fuck? They're like the opposite of us, and somehow we're still only 2 points behind them, and we're basically doing the same in the league. Also,
do you know what? No, actually, that's an interesting. That might be an interesting thing that says something about Klopp versus not Klopp, Slot versus Maresca's style. You know, with Maresca making the pitch as wide as possible. You know, Slot likes a lot of his football to go through the center. So I don't know. Maybe that's being reflected here.
Maybe. Absolutely. It's a fair shout. Now, we do want to talk about Gent eventually, and we have spent quite a lot of time talking about whatever else so far. Just quickly to finish this off, Connor, from you, and then I'll ask Ollie's thoughts on it as well. What do you think, first and foremost, and I could shift this around to how, obviously, Poch played it last season, but obviously slightly different personnel, but in the grand scheme of things, it was just Cucurella inverting. What has Maresca done so differently to Poch? Obviously, towards the end, it worked all right anyway, regardless of whether, you know, it's Poch or Maresca. But what do you think he's doing so differently that's making us better? I saw an interesting video and shouted to him by, is his first name James? Is it James Laurenz?
Yeah, James Lawrence Walcott.
Yes,
yeah.
James Lawrence Walcott. That's it. And he about Chelsea, and he was talking about it. We essentially lose the ball, we give the ball away less. And because we give the ball away less, we have less turnovers against us. Therefore, we concede less shots. Therefore, we concede less goals. And because we give the ball away less, we also keep it more. Michael Owen. But because we then have good players, we create more. Is it just as simple as that, Connor, though?
I mean, really, yes. The reason we're giving the ball away less is because I think a few different things. I think, one, the shape is more consistent now. I think everybody knows their role. I think this is not just a Maresca
knowing
thing.
Where your teammate is, and you don't have to look every time.
And I don't think this is just a Maresca thing. I think this is an age thing, and I think this is a time thing. I think they've played with each other for longer. I think there's less sort of like big changes into the team, and I do just think it is the byproduct of one extra year. And I said this last year, and I'll say it again. I think next year there'll be another jump in quality purely down to age and progression.
Yeah.
And I think,
and whether we change manager or not, that step will happen.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I've not been a fan of Poch, but even though at the time I still felt it made sense not to sack him because he fixed it a little bit at the end of the season. Now I think, no, it was good that we sacked him. But at the time, obviously, we didn't know what we were going to get from Maresca. But I think that's an important point because obviously big haters like Lewis, love Lewis, but still, big haters like Lewis is like, look at what Maresca could do, Poch could do, none of this. And I'm like, well, yeah, we bought a bunch of teenagers, and a lot of them have now come into their 20s and aren't teenagers anymore. Of course, they're going to be better now. Like Connor just said, like but not only as individuals, but because we did so crazy as Chelsea, we changed everything in the space of 18 months. Everything, every player, every staff member, every single thing other than the kit man changed, literally. So not only do these players have to develop individually, they also have to develop relationships and connections with each other. But because that is now both developing at the same time, our development as a team is now kind of exponential, because those two very important factors to team and player development are now happening at the same time. Well, usually a team will either have a stable team, add some young players and let them develop alongside a stable team, or they have a young team but then don't change it constantly, so then they can develop consistently, but at least they know each other. But at Chelsea, we had both of those things are happening at the same time. So I think we'll get quicker better, but it took us longer to get better. Would you agree with that, Connor?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was always going to happen with the strategy that we were going for. And I think people just had to sort of bite that bullet and sort of allow it to happen, because there was no other way. Once we've made that decision to sell a lot of the experience and do it all in one go, it was almost just, you're going to have to be patient now. Because whilst I do think that it was, of course, quite naive to do it all in one go, I also think that if we hadn't have done it all in one go, we'd still be waiting now. I think we'd actually be further behind than we sort of are, because I think now we're quite ready to sort of take those layers and expand further. Whereas I think we could still be, if we'd have done it the other way, we could still be actually building.
This is interesting. Yeah. I mean, I guess I hear that. At the same time, I'm like, we could have just not overdone it with having quite so many people at the same age in the squad and have it made the whole process a bit slower, but just phase certain players out slow. And then I'm not sure if I agree that we'd then be worse off right now. You just have to pick the right players to replace and the right players to phase out, and not, phase out the worst, the best ones because they give you the most money, and then have the bad ones left over. Now, obviously, that would have been a bad idea. I agree with that.
When I say worse off, I sort of mean like in the difference of, say, we'd have done it a bit slower and we'd have had a sixth, a fifth, a fourth, sort of four. I think the idea of now is sort of like it's gone from like a 12th, a sixth, then we might get a fourth, and then we might already be ready to sort of go even further then. So whereas I think it may have been slower, like you say, a more steady sort of a few sixth and fifth places before we then maybe get the odd fourth, and then we start to challenge. I thought it maybe would have taken a little bit drawn out.
It's like an exponential curve, isn't it? It's gone like that, and then it's going to go bang. Like it's just going to go mental. Exactly. I also think when this discussion around Pochettino and Maresca, I don't understand why both of them can't be praised. I don't understand why praising one has to mean deriding the other one, because in a lot of ways, like, Pochettino did a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong, but one of the things he did certainly give us, at least for a season, was some stability and some togetherness, which is something that we're paying dividends from. So, like there's things that were laid in the groundwork of Pochettino last season that are benefiting us this season. There's also things he did last season which probably aren't benefiting us this season. Like, the fact that we haven't had many players play many games since last season because of all the injuries that he caused us. So like there's definitely there's a plus and a minus on both sides here. I don't necessarily, one being good doesn't mean the other one is bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do agree with that. Even though I still think there's no need to, you play too much games in hindsight, where it's like, yeah, sure, in hindsight, we know the end of the season worked, and that kind of put us in a positive step towards now. But what he did at the end of the season, he could have just figured that out a lot earlier instead of playing Colwell at left back for half the season. I mean, only really when Colwell got injured, he was forced to pick Cucurella again.
Even something like that is paying us benefits and dividends this season, because Colwell's better at defending wide areas. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, even things that might even have been bad last season have given us benefit this season.
But if he played Colwell not there, maybe Colwell would be much better already at central.
Well, it's he plays coconuts, isn't it? Like,
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Obviously, every player will improve with difficult situations. Maybe it's always a difficult debate, isn't it? Do you improve more when things are difficult, or do you improve more when things are are going well. But what I think is interesting before we get into our team, which I do want to get to quickly, but just as a last quick conversation on this topic, Connor, can we be title challengers? I assume you're going to say no. But would you also go against that it was just a purple patch so far?
I'm going to say no purely for my own sanity, because I don't want to get drawn into a title sort of idea yet, and I don't really want to get drawn into it until way down the line, if that's even possible. So I would say no, because I do think that patch is coming that we spoke about earlier, that little rough patch. But yeah, I'd also agree. I don't think it is a purple patch. I think the upward curve that we've taken, I don't think it's a sort of chance. I think it is quite clear that was always the strategy, both with manager and with, like I said, with the players' ages and just progressing in general. So I do think that this isn't a purple patch in form. I think we are improving. And I think, if anything, the improvements are going to be far more than we've even seen now. I think by the end of the season, this won't even look like the best patch. There'll
Hopefully.
be far, yeah, exactly. So hopefully far better to come. That's what I'd say. No for a title challenge, but not a purple patch overall.
Yeah, no, that is fair. I'm going to take the Conference League games out of this a little bit here, because first of all, we should be winning all of them. And by the time we've won a few, we don't need to win all of them anymore. So I'm going to ignore them a little bit. Out of these next Prem games, Connor, until this 3rd of November against Manchester United. So Forest on the weekend, then the international break, then Liverpool at Anfield, Newcastle at home. I'm going to include the cup game, even though it's not points, and then that United game. What results are you expecting and predicting here? And I know this is putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I think we'll beat Forest narrowly. I think it will be a tough game. I think it might be a little bit, not like the Bournemouth in terms of performance, but I think it could be sort of like a 1-0, 2-1.
Especially because wasn't Bournemouth the last game after an international break?
I can't remember.
Is Gibbs White still suspended for that?
No, I think he's back.
No. But yes, it was. So because the whole, obviously I know he wasn't officially ill, but that whole not having Enzo, maybe we'll have that problem at Liverpool this time, because we'll be back from an international break and Caicedo and Enzo coming from South America again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see us losing that game to Liverpool. I think we'll beat Man United though. I think we'll finally beat our old Trafford.
Hopefully, my God, please, God.
I think if I had to guess, I think based on the last games that we've played, I think we'll beat Newcastle 1 out of 2 times. We'll beat Man United and we'll beat Forest, and maybe the others are a bit more up in the air.
Yeah, my way of viewing it is it's quite tough at the minute, because I think we've played quite a few of the similar opposition. I'm really looking forward to the Liverpool and the United games, especially because I want to see who holds more of the ball, and I want to see if that's done by design or done by sort of outdoing each other. I think it'll be really interesting, especially Liverpool at Anfield, whether sort of Maresca goes there with the idea that we're going to drop off and let them play and then we're going to try and hit them on the break, or whether Slot basically comes with the same idea of Chelsea are very good on the break, we want them to have the ball. So I'm really intrigued. Sort of, I think that alone will have a massive impact on the actual result of the game. So it's really hard to tell.
It is very interesting, and I'm really intrigued by the same. Am I crazy to say I think we might come out of this unbeaten?
I don't think
it's outrageous to suggest that. I think because we could draw all 5, couldn't we? But I think we're probably going to win more. I think what you mean is, are we going to come out of this unbeaten and winning more than we don't? Winning more than we draw. I don't think that's outrageous at all.
I think we'll beat Forest. I think we'll draw at Anfield. I think we'll beat Newcastle at the Bridge.
I think we'll draw at St James's Park, though.
Yeah, but there is no draw in that. So,
that's
we'll have to win or lose on pens. So.
Well, then we're winning it then, because you said unbeaten.
If we, I reckon, scrape a draw and win on pens.
Yeah.
So I'll take it. I'll take it. Man United is the one where I'm like, every single fucking year I sit there and I'm like, we should be beating them.
It's got to be this year, man.
We don't beat them.
But this is the first year. This is the first year where they've been a clown show, in a while, where they've been a clown show and we've been all right. So it's got to be this year, man.
Do you know what it is though? For me, that is actually probably the most worrying game there. More than Liverpool.
Do you know what I worry about more than anything?
No one would lose their mind if we lose at Anfield. That's why Liverpool.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
The most worrying thing for me is what happens if Ten Hag gets sacked right before that game.
What I think happens, Ten Hag gets sacked somewhere here, and then we
somewhere
face...
between Panathinaikos and Newcastle, the second one. Yeah, like
no, exactly. And then they'll have Ruud van Nistelrooy, and it will be like when we played Michael Carrick, and we'll somehow lose.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it's going to go. So, yeah, we can have the annual loss at Old Trafford, but maybe we'll win all the other games. That would be fun, wouldn't it? But yeah, of course, let's finally get into it. I kept the boys longer than I wanted to anyway. Tomorrow against Gent. First of the Conference League games, obviously the game from pot 1 as well. So in theory, the most difficult, even though I think actually Panathinaikos away, purely for the away crowd, or their home crowd, will arguably be even more difficult in terms of level of opponent. But I'm intrigued to what the boys think we will turn up with as a team today. Now, I'll keep it simple. We all know Jorgensen will start in goal. Just quickly, Connor, do you see, if Sanchez keeps making mistakes like he did against Brighton, do you see at any point Jorgensen replacing Sanchez in the Prem, even for a one-off game? Or do you think it needs an injury for that to happen?
I think it's possible that it happens. I don't see it happening so soon. I think maybe like you're talking after Christmas, unless there's an injury.
Once there's no Conference League games for Jorgensen to play anymore. Yeah,
but definitely possible. But I do actually think that Maresca holds quite a bit of. I think he actually quite likes Sanchez, so I do think it will be difficult because I think he quite even though there is a mistake in him, I think he likes the sort of confidence and almost
but considering he really wanted to bring the Leicester goalkeeper, I can't like him too much either, can
you? Like I said, I do think it could happen, but I would say you're talking after Christmas, January sort of time.
Yeah, fair dues. I'm quickly, when you put the lineup up like this and you're like mixing between on the ball, off the ball, do you put it up in a 4-2-3-1? Would that be correct in your mind?
A lot of people have done it in the 4-2-3-1. I continue to do it in a 4-3-3 because, but like sort of a staggered one. But a 4-2-3-1's
and then you put Palmer as one of the midfielders, do you?
I put him as like the more advanced 8, basically. That's I sort of do it like that. Yeah.
Still,
but you can do it. Like a lot of people do.
Although
that probably is
we're not playing Palmer this game, maybe it's going to be different.
Yeah,
that is quite similar to how things probably will end up, regardless.
Yeah, probably. All right then. Back 4, boys. Ollie, I'll ask you first. If you have a different opinion of what you want and what you expect, just tell me both. But how much rotation are you essentially expecting? Because that's kind of the be-all and end-all here. Are you expecting Badiashile and Disasi, or are you expecting at least Kobel and Disasi? Because obviously Fofana isn't in the Conference League squad either.
I think there'll
Tosin.
certainly be some rotation. I mean, like in the last game, against Barrow, I know it's completely different opposition and, different competition, but 11 changes. Like Maresca isn't really afraid to change things up because he's, like he said after that game, it doesn't matter how many players you change when the system and everything you want to set up for is the same.
Yeah. It also makes us much more ready for all the Prem games, the more we can change in the midweek, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. My 2 centre-backs, I would want personally, because I think Gent are a good enough outfit. I think they didn't they win the Belgian league last season?
No, they actually only came 7th, but in a weird, in the same league system that Switzerland and Austria have, where you have 12 teams. After half of the games, they split it into a top 6 and a bottom 6, and they play playoffs against each other. So it's a bit of a weird one. But currently they're 3rd in the table.
Okay, well, I think they're a decent outfit. I think I would go with Colwell and Disasi, I think.
Not Tosin.
Oh, sorry, Colwell. That's what I meant. Colwell and Tosin. Yeah.
I think I would like to see. I would do that too. Connor, would you do that? And what do you expect?
I think Badiashile starts. I'd be 99% sure personally, because he's very specifically spoken about Badiashile being one of the most unlucky in the squad through training to not be playing, and I think Badiashile is. I don't think he's done anything massively howling sort of this since pre-season. Say,
I would argue Servette away was pretty howling.
No, you're right. Actually, I forgot about that. You are right because him and Disasi.
But other than that, I agree. But he hasn't
played
against
Inter Milan, if I remember rightly. Did he even play against Inter in pre-season? He didn't have a great game.
I meant after pre-season.
Yeah.
But yeah, Servette, you're right. I forgot that him and Disasi were both very poor in that game.
Yeah, but I think in terms of predicted 11, I think it will be those two because of exactly like Connor said, him saying that about Badiashile. I mean, do you see Maresca at all doing just playing Badiashile and Kobo? But that would be harsh on Tosin as well.
Yeah, again, I think Tosin has to play.
I think whichever one. I think if you had to play them both, because they're both left-footed, one of them would be on the left and invert, and that doesn't really suit either of them. So
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. Fullbacks then. First one, Veiga at left. back, or are you expecting Cucurella to stay in the team?
No, it's
Connor?
got to be
I'd
Vega,
go Vega.
surely.
Yeah.
Both
I
of you
think,
saying Vega?
yeah,
Oh,
Cuckoo needs
yeah.
the rest, man. Like,
I
Does
really like
he
Vega as well. I think
because
he's excellent.
Cucurella was subbed off at the weekend, which isn't normal. Now, I know he was booked, so maybe that played a role in it as well. But the fact that he was subbed off made me think maybe he starts again.
And then
Nobody
Vega
else-
came
don't
on
know.
was brilliant as well, though. Vega
yeah,
was
when
brilliant
Vega
that
came on, he
game.
was brilliant, and he only had 10 minutes or so.
Yeah,
So, like,
that was
I
true.
think he's rapidly playing his way into the squad proper, isn't he? He's
Yeah.
doing a very good job.
I just don't like him as a normal left back. If he was playing centre back, like, but if he was doing what Fofana does on the right and Vega just does that on the left, I'd be buzzing for that.
He'll be inverting
fan of him
mostly.
in midfield. I don't know, man. I think he gets a bit stressed by the pressure sometimes, but maybe it's still adapting. Obviously, he's used to the Swiss league. So, but he even struggled against Servette, to start the game with. I was like, bro, these lot are the ones you shouldn't be struggling.
These are your people, bro.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. You know what I mean? But what about right back? Because Fofana isn't in the squad.
Yeah.
Reece James isn't fit. Are we going to play Gusto again now? Because we have an international break after Forest, maybe it's a risk worth taking. Because I'm like, if he didn't start at your point against Barrow, he's not going to start at your point against Gent. There is no way that's happening. So realistically, the choice is between starting Gusto again or starting Disasi. And if I'm choosing between those two, I know what I'm picking. But I'm just a little bit scared of injuring Gusto again. So,
Yeah.
Thoughts, Connor?
Pretty much how you labelled it out there. Action would be my dream, but like you said, not going to happen because it didn't happen against Barrow, so there's no way he does it in the first conference game. Disasi is what I think will happen, and
Really?
Gusto.
Okay.
That's what I think will happen to protect Gusto.
But if he's going to do that tomorrow, why the fuck did he start Gusto against Barrow though?
I do think it's probably just to like get his minutes back in his legs because he only played 45, didn't he? But
Yeah.
I did find that strange as well. But
I think Gusto might cede minutes this game, but I don't think he'll start.
yeah, possibly last half hour. I don't know.
I think Con's spot on. I think it'll be Disasi. Everyone wants Achi Ampong, but it won't be him.
Yeah,
I think it will be Gusto, but you boys have outvoted me, so we'll go with this and we'll
I'd
see
be
how it goes.
happier if it's Gusto. I'd be more.
I'd
worried
be much
as well.
happier if it was Gusto.
I'd also be more worried. But
Yeah. But like in an ideal world, you go 2-0 up, and at halftime we take Gusto off, and then you bring Disasi on. But you don't start with
bring
Disasi at
Akinfo on.
0-0. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be my ideal. Now, Casadei, interestingly, didn't see that coming, did the press conference today. Don't know why. We're not playing an Italian team or nothing, so I have no idea why that happened. But hey, there you go. So is anybody expecting Casadei to start again? Or are you thinking, because Lavia, again, isn't allowed, even though otherwise I'm sure he would probably start today. So I wonder if because obviously Nizar Kentella asked Maresca in a press conference today about, does he regret not including Chilwell in the Conference League squad? He said no. I wonder if he regrets not putting Lavia in it because
he might. I think Casadei may well play.
I think he's going to
I
play.
think I say those days.
I think one of the biggest issues for our midfield is actually that it's not very tall, and Casadei wins headers, and it's hard
But
to
I have no
argue.
idea how tall Gent's team is. I'll be honest.
Yeah, but it's hard to argue against that for set pieces, isn't it?
But we add Veiga in the team instead of Cucurella, so we're already adding dramatic amounts of height, to be fair.
and Disasi.
And
Disasi, yeah. There you
But
go. So surely height shouldn't be the problem now.
Effectively, but all our attackers are pretty short, though. So as well, so I think
Especially when
Palmer
Cuckoo
might be
starts,
the
obviously, up front.
funnily enough. But I think those five will be sort of the five headers of the team.
There you go. I mean, who do you think will play at the base, though? Do you think Casadei?
I do.
He'll do a bit like
Yeah.
a little bit like Lavia, who'll turn and go, won't he?
Yeah.
I personally think
to be
it's going
fair,
to be
Maresca
Casadei.
was full of praise for Casadei after the Barrow game, so maybe that played him into it.
He was good in that game.
I didn't think he
thought
was
it was-
very good.
I thought it was
I thought
okay.
he had a bad first 10, and then he was.
We're into it for sure, but at the same time, I think for me that was your opportunity to stamp your authority on that game. Like, you are miles better than this lot, and he didn't really stand out much.
Yeah, I think he was sort of just tasked.
I mean,
with the
Maresca
role of
praised him a lot, to be
staying.
fair. But
Yeah, maybe he did then to Maresca. So
yeah, I guess that is what matters most, to be fair. But yeah, I'm intrigued that you both are picking Casadei, because now that you've picked Disasi and Casadei, aren't you both expecting 11 changes then? Because in the other positions, I'm expecting changes for 100%. So these were the only two where I was like, maybe we won't change. So are you both
Maresca
expecting
really
11
likes
changes?
to rotate, man. I wouldn't be surprised if we literally saw like two effectively different squads this season.
I wouldn't be surprised by it either. I'm not sure if
I didn't I didn't want to ruin it at the start because it's obviously a prediction and like for the stream, but I think it's going to be pretty much the exact same team that played Barrow, bar Disasi for Gusto. That's what I think is going to happen.
Do you? Who did you think was going to start in that six?
Me,
Saturday.
Yeah,
I think Caicedo. I think
you thought Caicedo will start. I think he needs the rest, bro. Like,
I mean, isn't that the whole point of having Lavia though?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like you say,
otherwise, what the fuck do we have Lavia for? Just either start Lavia against Forest. It's fine. He's more than good enough for Forest.
This, so it may also makes you like, you're like, why did we loan out both Santos and Ugachukwu?
Yeah, and also if Casadei gets to start all the Conference League games, and if he starts Gent, I'm expecting him to start all of them because Gent is arguably the difficult,
at least in the group stage, right?
Yeah, well, no, obviously, I'm only talking league stage. Obviously, knockouts is different, but until Christmas, and then I'm like, Casadei will get 3 times more minutes until Christmas than Lavia will, even if Lavia is fit, and that's mental. So I'm like, just start Caicedo in the Conference League and start Lavia in the Prem if you have to, and bring them on at half time or whatever. I don't know. That was what I do. But if you both think Casadei, I'm more than happy to.
Again, Caicedo would be like, I'd probably like to see that more, but with Casadei, I just think more so because that press conference usually that has an indicator. So
I think if we were making a team that we wanted to see, it'd be very different.
Yeah,
fair enough. So here we expecting Dewsbury Hall then, or anyone given a Carney will make a shout?
Wedding Hall,
unfortunately not.
Him in.
Yeah, I mean it should be Carney. We all know it should be, but it won't be. So the less said about him, the better. What about the next one, Joao Felix then?
Yeah, he's going to be playing sort of behind the striker, I think.
He's the Palmer replacement. This is his team for me.
Yeah.
This secondary unit is his team.
That's what Maresca said, didn't he? He said he was talking about who like is on the left and the right and the middle, and he spoke about Felix in that kind of central role. So
the only thing he did actually say today in today's press conference that maybe it looks like that so far, but that he will not actually have this clear midweek team and clear weekend team. Yeah. So I guess tomorrow we'll see proof of that or not.
It'd be interesting though, because I suppose at the end of the day, like he says, it's like if it's the same system and it's the same players, eventually you should be able to swap it in and out whoever you want, and it will still function the same.
No, 100%. It's just one. Then we'll have to start 2 in a row. It's like, for example, if we wanted to start Neto on the weekend, you'd probably start Madueke tomorrow. But then that would mean Madueke starts 2 in a row, and then it's
or someone misses 2 in a row. So like
well,
again,
like Neto in this case would. Yeah, it's
before the international break, I would go Neto tomorrow and then Madueke on Sunday. That's how I'd do it.
Yeah, it's fair because also Neto will play more for Portugal in the break than Madueke will.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are on that sort of train at the minute, but I also don't think I think Madueke is doing fine. I think there could be a few. Like he could have a few more goals and assists. Like he obviously maybe should have passed it against Brighton, and he's had a few chances.
Should have just scored. Is what he should have done.
Yeah, but
it's perfectly fine to shoot, in my opinion. Just score.
Yeah, true. But for me, I actually think he's doing enough. I know a lot. That's quite an unpopular opinion, but
I personally wouldn't drop him at the moment because we're scoring goals for fun for the first time in fucking ages. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, man.
I also think defensively he's very important, and I'm not to say Pedro Neto isn't because he does come on and show that same intensity, but I think Madueke is very important for Maresca.
I think the problem is for what you get with Madueke, you can't get someone who's got the quality on the ball and the defensive work off the ball by replacing him with anyone else we have.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And my issue is not. I think that maybe you could make an argument to take Madueke out and try someone else. But what I don't think you can make an argument for is that Pedro Neto has done enough to really warrant that. Because Pedro Neto has played the easier opponents and realistically done fuck all since his debut. Like, let's be honest, he's done fuck all since.
I think that's an important thing.
That's an important thing. Fuck all against Barrow.
It's an important thing to note, Loz, because I don't think we should be giving people starts on the merit of whether a player's doing badly. They should earn it themselves through training, through good performances in games. And that's what's going to give those players a bit of a kick, and the competition they need to strive on and do better. Because I think too often with Chelsea, we've been in a lot of situations, especially in the last few years, but probably the last 7 or 8, to be honest, where someone has a bad game and you say, "Oh, just drop them for so and so," and it's I don't know. Now I'm kind of feeling like maybe you need a bit more stability.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
he says, "Well, we're doing a team of 11 changes, but whatever,
Yeah, at least consistency in the Prem and consistency in the other games. But Connor, do you see that as well? What have you felt about Pedro Neto? I like him and everything, and I'm positively surprised that he hasn't got injured yet. But I'm sadly surprised that even though he is fit, and everybody told me the problem is, does he stay fit? Nobody said the problem was, will he play well? But so far, the problem hasn't been staying fit. The problem has been playing well. I'm not saying he's been awful, right, by the way. I'm not trying to say that. But other than that little back heel to Gusto for the Nkunku goal last week against Barrow, he played a League 2 team and didn't do anything. Now, I know they played a back five. That wasn't that easy for the wingers. But Mudryk did way more in that second half. And you know how people talk about fucking Mudryk in this fan base nowadays. And Pedro Neto did not even half as much as Mudryk did in that second half. So I don't know. I need to see a bit more, man. And I think tomorrow is could be the night for Pedro Neto to start showing that. Do you, Connor?
Yeah, for sure. I think, like you say, I don't think he's shown enough since he joined. By no means do I think he's been bad. I think he's had moments, but not enough. But like how it is at the minute, it's not worrying me because one, I think there's a lot more to come because I know what he played. I've seen him play at Wolves. I know what he's capable of. But also, I'm happy with Madueke and Sancho. Like I said a minute ago, I know it's an unpopular opinion with Madueke, but I'm very happy with him out there. So how it is right now and giving Pedro Neto maybe that little bit more time to maybe implement himself, get those connections going. I also think he connects well with Felix. So like being in this unit right now, if he was to look at it as two different units, it's working. So I think right now, until Neto does hit a really good like patch of form and he maybe earns that space over Madueke, I think it's sort of in the right place at the minute.
Yeah, fair enough. Ashraf says Neto wasn't playing with our best starting 11, though. Don't play Disasi behind him and Casada in midfield and expect him to perform. But Ashraf, are you telling me that you're not expecting if Madueke started against Barry would have scored at least 2 goals? Because I do. If Madueke played against Barry, would have battered them on his own. And Pedro Neto, maybe I'm giving Noni too much credit here, but that's what I think Noni, the worse the opponent is, the more that guy turns up because he's like, I'm slapping you tonight. And Pedro Neto just didn't. That's what I will say. And my thing is, the more likely scenario for Madueke to lose his spot for me is to play Lavia in midfield and let Gusto be the right winger and then let Palmer invert. And that's how Madueke, I think Madueke is more likely to use his spot that way than he is to lose it directly to Pedro Neto for the Prem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess everyone will have a different opinion on that. And what matters is what opinion and Enzo Maresca has about it. But to finish it off, because I need to head out in a couple of minutes, score prediction for tomorrow. Ollie, why don't you go first? Gent tomorrow. We need to start off well because our Conference League qualifiers, sure, we won at home against Servette, but we made that unnecessarily difficult. Let's please put that whole making things unnecessarily difficult thing to bed. Let's do it like Barrow last week, batter them, and go on happy. Do you think that will happen though?
Yeah, I'm going to say that it's going to happen. I'm going to go with 3-0. Let the good times roll, baby.
Love it. Connor, thoughts? Prediction?
I'm going to go 2-0 was what I thought.
Okay, I was initially going to say 3-0, but to make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to say 4-1 instead. So, I'll take a 4-1 as well. So, hopefully we are right or not, Connor, just for a more fun afternoon or evening. Yeah. But yeah, at the end of the day, I very much enjoyed this. Connor, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your insight with us. I hope everybody found it interesting and educational, whatever words you want to use. I certainly did. Ollie, thank you very much for coming on as well. I'll shout out both of your stuff in just a second. But yeah, Ollie, as always, appreciate it. Do check out, like I just said, I will shout it out. Do check out Ollie on Twitter. You can see his @ on screen, the same as his podcast @ on Twitter. And then at the Bridge Pod, of course, the link is down in the description. Please do check them out. And the same goes for Connor. Check out his Twitter for all the threads about analysis, although we've realized for the last 2 games he didn't do that. So check out his YouTube, more importantly, because he does video analysis of each and every game beforehand as well, what to expect and everything. So please do check out his channel. It's linked down in the description below. And of course, please do also check out mine and Pice's podcast. The new episode was released yesterday of Chelsea Unfiltered, our podcast. Obviously, this time we speak mostly about Chelsea for Brighton 2, the Cole Palmer show and everything else. Links are down in the description. Like I say, please do check them out. Leave a 5-star rating on Spotify. But yeah, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated. Hit that like button for me. Thank you very much. But yeah, on that note, thank you guys for watching. Up the Chelsea, upwards and onwards, and we will see you next time.